Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about some of the communication implications of COVID-19. You can advance to the next slide. Dr. Telg mentioned it, but I am with the UF-IFAS Center for Public Issues Education and Agriculture and Natural Resources. And if you aren't familiar with the PI Center, we do a lot of this kind of work, kind of feeling what the public's response is to certain issues and hopefully helping scientists better understand those issues and incorporate those in their communication. Next slide. Related to COVID-19, we've done a series of data collection, starting that very first one in March 13th through 15th, when this was kind of coming on the horizon, not quite yet a pandemic, but headed in that direction with a public opinion survey. And then we did an Ag and Natural Resource Leaders survey, a second round of public opinion survey, and then a third round of public opinion survey. So kind of spacing these out, catching some of the perceptions over time related to these. We've also embedded some pieces that are specific to that point in time. So most of what I'll focus on today's presentation, just trying to concentrate it, will be the things that we've collected across all four of these points. But I will highlight some specifics that I think will be of interest to this particular group, and then some recommendations we have from all of it. To talk about a little bit about data collection, the national samples, we use panels with Qualtrics, and each of the public opinion panels had about 1,500 responses. They varied from about 1,512 to 1,550. So right in that 1,500 ballpark. The Ag and Natural Resource Leaders survey, we collected through a national organization, actually an international organization of Ag and Natural Resource Leaders programs. And so we have responses from 17 states, and 225 people responded to that survey. So because of the differences in size here, I will be reporting primarily percentages today, so they'll be kind of comparable across those data points. So next slide, please. I'm going to get into the communication concerns first, lead with those since we said that's what we would talk about here. So next slide, please. These, as I said, we've collected these over multiple points in time. So you'll see the abbreviations that I had on the previous page, and you'll see these throughout the presentation. PO1 is that public opinion 1, A&R 1 is the Ag and Natural Resource Leader. There's only one of those currently. And then I think PO2 and PO3 are self-explanatory as the second and third public opinion data sets there. So we essentially asked people if they were concerned, if they were getting accurate information, if their loved ones were getting accurate information, and if others who they didn't love were getting accurate information. And as you can see, over a period of time, that has really grown as far as that concern. But they were never unconcerned about this topic. The majority of the people were concerned throughout the process. You'll notice the Ag and Natural Resource Leaders were concerned about others a little bit earlier than other people were as concerned about others. If you want to advance to the next slide, please. This is that same points of data here. I've just put it on a line chart here so that we can view it a little differently, but essentially showing that we've seen some growth over time in concern about getting accurate information. And I think I'll talk about it at the end, but that's certainly a gap that I think the people who are speaking at this conference, as well as those tuning in, can really fill related to your expertise. So that's where the public pulse is and the Ag and Natural Resource Leaders. Next slide, please. This data point here, we really only collected in our A&R Leaders survey, but because of the focus of this conference, I did want to pull it out that 64.4% of the Ag and Natural Resource Leaders said they were concerned that ag and farm laborers were not getting accurate information about COVID-19. Certainly listening to the previous presentation and others over the 2 days, I think you're actively doing something about this. So hopefully if we were to measure again in the near future, that number would have gone down some. Next slide, please. All right, now this is one that we really only ask in that first round in March. We've been kind of moving things in and out as we've seen issues change, but we wanted to see not only if they were receiving accurate information, but if they felt like people were sharing inaccurate information. And you'll notice we ask about the media as well as the public. And in that public opinion 1 and ANR 1, quite a few people were concerned that others were sharing inaccurate information. And I think the public is always a thing that we're concerned about, sharing inaccurate information, but I think it hit home to us that people were also feeling like the media were sharing inaccurate information. And again, just a comparison here, the ANR leaders were more concerned about that. We might speculate that that's because they're a little more plugged in and at this early point in time knew a little bit more about what was going on compared to the general public audience. Next slide, please. All right, moving into the economic concerns, of course, we had to ask about the economic concerns. These continue to be a challenge throughout this pandemic. Next slide. You'll notice here that we also learned across this process and realized what was happening. So this is one of the ones that in public opinion 1, we didn't ask about personal finances. We hadn't thought of that yet as a concern, and then we added it along the way here. So that's why we don't have a blue line on the public opinion 1 there. But essentially, you can see from this data, people are extremely concerned about their personal finances, their state finances, their US finances, as well as the global economy. And while that shifted a little bit over time, it's predominantly grown, as you can see in the next slide. Essentially the same data, but put it in a line chart here so that we can look at that over this period of time. They're really, the ANR leaders were the most concerned with the economic impacts at all different levels. And again, we might speculate that they're a little more tuned in to what's happening than our general public audience. But the amount of growth has slowed down a little bit. When we take our next measurement, we would like to see that that was decreasing, but after stimulus packages and that sort of thing, and we may see another increase in concern, but high levels of concern across all of these areas, including personal finances in US and international. Next slide, please. Again, this group probably cares about those increased food prices, and we did manage to ask that across all 4 of these surveys. And people were concerned even as early as March, mid-March there with the first public opinion panel, were concerned about increased food prices. I think it's interesting that the ANR leaders weren't quite as concerned about that. And we've had some discussions and have thought perhaps that might be because they understand how little we currently pay for our food in the US as far as a percentage of personal income. But that concern for increased food prices has continued to rise in our public opinion 2 and public opinion 3 there as well. Next slide. We also wanted to know certainly about the impact on small businesses and farmers and ranchers. You'll notice this is a concern that we thought of a little later in the game, so we added that in public opinion 2 as well as public opinion 3. And people were concerned about small businesses, and they were concerned about farmers and ranchers as well. I think as you look at them in this data point, you may feel like not quite as much, but public opinion 1, still 88% of the people were concerned about farmers and ranchers, and that increased to 90% in the 3rd round of the public opinion survey. Next slide, please. Other concerns, these don't necessarily aren't data points that we collected at all pieces in time, but they were things that I heard this group was concerned with, so pulled some of those in so we could talk about them today. So next slide, please. Again, this could be an audience that members of this audience are looking to reach are illegal immigrants or non-citizens. And there was a concern across all surveys that people thought they might not seek medical attention if they had COVID-19 or COVID-19 symptoms. We didn't ask some of the whys behind that necessarily, let them make their own interpretations related to that. But we really did see a concern across all audiences for that as a major consideration. Next slide, please. One thing that we're all talking about, and from the very beginning we're talking about, in our public opinion first round survey, we asked people if there were a vaccine for COVID-19 today, would you get it? And 80.3% of the people at that point in time said that they would get it. We did kind of pull this out and do a poster about it, so there's some more details in the poster session as well, but I'll just give you some highlights of what we learned here. Was really that more positive attitudes towards vaccines meant that people were more likely to get a vaccine. And if they had a greater degree of health concerns related to COVID-19, then they were more likely to get it. Also, if they had more trust in science, they were more likely to get it. So all of these were significant predictors of whether they would get a vaccine. Next slide, please. We also, in the second round of public opinion data, asked about social distancing. That was the first time that had really been on our mind as a word we'd ever really heard. And at that point in time, 80.6% of people said that they were practicing social distancing beliefs. We didn't have a lot of time to analyze the third round before these slides were due, but we're seeing that consistently happening in the third round as well, is that they agreed they wanted to do what scientists and healthcare professionals thought that they should do related to social distancing. Next slide, please. And high majorities of people said that they were both willing to comply and able to comply with social distancing practices. So I feel like this is kind of an important data point to bring up when some of the things in the news may look a little bit different than this. Next slide, please. The bringing it all, what does this mean for communication? Well, really, don't be afraid to share your science. There is an information deficit out there. Also share what the scientific process looks like. I think as people are seeing, well, this one thing now, and then this other thing, maybe that thing doesn't work anymore. Well, that's just science in action. And the more that we can share with people that it's a good thing when we find out what does and doesn't work to move on to the next level. Share your credentials. They're concerned about what kind of information they're getting, so make sure they understand that you're credible, and encourage your networks to share quality information. That's how real community change happens, is not only if we're sharing accurate information, but if everyone else is, and seeking accurate channels to share that information. Multiple channels, people are isolating themselves and using one or another channel that may not see as many. Certainly be sensitive. People are concerned across this board, highly concerned about all aspects of this pandemic, but quality information should be comforting to them in that area. Next slide, please. As I said, we have a lot of data related to this. So we have outputs of that data available at the Pi Center website, a landing page that's /COVID-19 there. We also have an upcoming webinar on the third round of public opinion data and what that means for science communication. And that's October 8th. You can register at that site there. Next slide. We also have a lot more planned. We are in the process of developing the fourth round of public opinion data collection, which will happen in a few weeks, really. And we will focus a lot on vaccines and if people's opinions have changed since early March about the vaccine. We also got a grant to study the food supply chain issues and the behavior of the public related to food. So we'll be doing that over the next 2 years. And we're seeking more funds, of course, all the time to do more outreach on this topic as well. And next slide, that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'd be happy to hear from you later if you have questions or want to email me follow-up as well.
Great, thank you, Dr. Baker. So yes, there'll be time for Q&A. If you want to go ahead and start typing those in. We will take the questions for Dr. Baker and Danielle Andrews at that point after Danielle's presentation. But go ahead and start typing things in now if you'd like to do so, and I'll facilitate those questions in about 12 minutes or so. And with us, we have Danielle Andrews to talk to us about Farm to You. Danielle.
Hi, everyone. Alrighty, so again, I'm Danielle Andrews from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thanks for having me today. So we are going to talk a little bit about the department's creation that came as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Florida Farm to You. All right, next slide. Sorry, I tried to hit next myself. So what we pretty much noticed is that with Florida having agriculture as such a large economic driver, that it was important that we kept Florida growing even despite the pandemic. Next slide. So when we think about things like the supply chain and just where agriculture falls, we see how far up the chain it is in relation to consumption, production, and how it distributes. And we knew that a lot of people, both Floridians and beyond, were depending on Florida agriculture to remain strong. Next slide. So when we start thinking about the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture, we started to see, especially on the news and different sites and disseminated through USDA and other channels, is that there was a global impact on agriculture as a result of COVID-19. So some of the images you'll see next are some of the things you'll probably recall seeing earlier in March or April. So next slide. Yep. Alrighty, so initially, there were so many questions in the agriculture industry about how the pandemic was impacting food supply, the chain, were certain foods safe. There was panic buying, not just with toilet paper, all kinds of commodities and different things. The demand from consumers was overwhelming for producers, was overwhelming for grocery stores. The demand from restaurants had started shrinking. The demand from schools started shrinking. So there was this entire disruption to the food supply chain. All right, next slide. So some of the images you may have seen were a lot from our dairy producers, right? That they were just dumping milk. There was no longer as much of a need. Think about it, right? Our schools, many of our schools had closed their doors for quite some time post spring break, and schools are a large purchaser of milk. And while yes, there were innovative ways that they were still supplying breakfast and lunch, still the number of students that were participating in those programs had drastically reduced. Next slide. So some additional things you also saw. So this is actually squash in Homestead, Florida, down in the South, and different fruits, vegetables all throughout the state were rotting, being picked over. They just were unable to be able to sell to some of their large bulk buyers. Next slide. So as a senior leadership team in the FDACS, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, we started to put our heads together because we were getting a lot of calls and very heart-wrenching stories for a lot of growers and producers. This was their livelihood, right? And it was really important to us to make sure that we could provide some sort of option or model that at least helped reduce the impact. Even if it was not a 100% solution for everyone, it still allowed us to reduce the impact. So this Florida Farm to You was born. And what this site is it is a way for growers and producers to connect with consumers or buyers from anywhere. And the growers and producers can list what their available commodities are, the quantity, for how long, how people can contact them, and anyone in the public can reach out to them. Oh, sorry, next slide. So some of the things that you see on this screen are different images that represent some of the things our department has worked on as a result of this pandemic. And so one of those things where we had a huge campaign called Be Smart Florida that we're still promoting. And SMART is an acronym for different things about sanitizing, wearing your mask, staying 6 feet away, and just other things that we constantly hear about during the coronavirus pandemic. And so during this time, oh no, that's during this time, Commissioner Freed used a lot of public platforms to make sure that we got the information out about the importance of staying safe and sanitized during COVID-19. So the Florida Farm to You site is actually made available now on our website as a department, and fdacs.gov/Florida Farm to You. It's a part of our Keep Florida Growing movement. Next slide. So Keep Florida Growing is an entire initiative. So it does not just include Farm to You. It included connecting and listing resources that ag producers may need from the federal level. There you see testimonials. There were also you pick farms that are more open to the consumer, generally like coming onto the farm.
Okay, we seem to have lost Danielle for the moment.
Yes.
So we will be working with Danielle to get back with her. So in the meantime, until we can get Danielle back, I'm going to ask Dr. Baker a couple questions, and we can kind of go on a little bit. If you have specific questions for her, please feel free to include those in your Q&A chat box there, and I'll help to facilitate that. But again, Lauri, until we can get Danielle back, what did you find interesting about the specific question, the answers that you received there in the results, specifically about the vaccines? Again, going into this time of the year where so much is being talked about with vaccines potentially released in October, November, next year and all that. So, and understanding that you'll have another round of study in the very near future.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll know more hopefully in this next round. But in the first round, people really were more interested in getting the vaccine if they had already gotten other vaccines, if in general their attitude was better toward vaccines. One of the things that we're seeing, and the reason why we're going to ask more questions in the next round, is public opinion seems to say some different things right now, that some people are worried about this quick turnaround for vaccines. And that wasn't something that we saw in the news during the early March phase. So that may have affected why so many people were willing to get that vaccine. We also saw in responses from people that more people were reporting getting other vaccines at the same time. So reporting of flu vaccine was up during that period of time. So we're hoping we'll see that trend with the flu vaccine this year as well, as when we move into actually having a COVID-19 vaccine. And I think Danielle's back, so I can be quiet now.
Okay, great. Danielle, we were just
I'm so sorry, my power just like blinked. They're doing some electrical work. Apparently, my husband just told me. I was like screaming, why did it blink? I am so
No, you're
sorry.
perfectly fine. We were having a good conversation here with Lauri, but don't feel bad, because if this would have been done here yesterday, power was out all across UF campus too because of bad weather and lightning strikes too. So we're happy to have blue skies here wherever you happen to be watching us in the state or country today. But yeah, those type of things happen. So that all is good. So go ahead and continue from where you were right there.
Yeah, sorry. So as a part of our Keep Florida Growing movement, Florida Farm to You was just one piece of the initiative. We wanted to make sure that ag producers, consumers, whoever needed it, the information, could come to our site and find a centralized hub for how anything that related to agriculture that was impacted as a result of the pandemic. Next slide. So this is actually a snapshot of what the site looks like. When you go to the site, there is a first link for you for available products. So if you are a business or a consumer and you'd like to make a purchase, you can, if you're not looking at it from the map, you can look at it from a filtered list of your county or a nearby county that you'd like to stop through, maybe on a drive or drive to it to purchase. If you are a grower, you can submit your available products. These links are available 24/7. The other piece that we learned from this after the initial rollout of the site was that many businesses or growers needed a way to be able to transport the services. And so there were so many transportation and logistic companies that reached out to us about how can we help as a part of this. So we established a link for transportation providers to be able to list their services and be contacted by the business, the consumer, the grower, whoever needed it to deliver that. And they would arrange payment if any. Many were, willing to work it into their systems already. From there, there's also at the bottom, there's a map that is on that main page, and you can see different images all throughout the state of Florida and see how many growers and producers throughout the state were listing their commodities, and just a quick little image of what that commodity was. Next slide. So here's the map that I was just talking about. Next. So here's how you can actually find different commodities. So if you wanted to search specifically by a commodity, you knew that you were looking for seafood or shellfish specifically, you could search and filter by that. Or you could search by county. Next. So if I was looking for alligator in all counties, I could see that at the time and date of this stamp, that I was able to find it in 3 different places, and this is how long they were available in the supply. So it primarily in the central headed down south area, but if I was truly searching for alligator meat and I wanted to go pick it up myself, that I could reach out to these growers and producers to be able to make it happen. Next. Another example for blueberry. So this is what it actually looks like when you start engaging in looking through and finding commodities. Next. For the transportation services, this is how they could enter their information. That way companies could list. Some were refrigerated truck options, some were non-refrigerated truck options, and they could also indicate that there. Next. All right. So the pandemic really shined a light on a lot of things that we were already experiencing, especially in many rural areas, like food insecurity. So Farmlink is something that has also been a way for people to donate and participate. And they actually done a piece and segment on Florida Farm to You as a great way, because it's kind of a similar, style of linking farms to the public and things of that sort. So it's been a great way for people who still want to help Florida agriculture, but as well as purchase and know directly where they could find fresh Florida grown fruits, vegetables, and other commodities. So for the Farm to You site, again, you can find it on our fdacs.gov website, but we also have an email address if you'd like more information. It's flfarmtoyou@fdacs.gov.
All right, great. Thank you both so much. Even during technical difficulties, we can make anything work on video. So please, if you're viewing this with us right now, please feel free to go ahead and type in questions, and we'll get started with that. So for my panelists here, Danielle and Lauri, Danielle, I'll start with you. What has been one of the challenges that you and FDACS have faced as far as using the Farm to You as a way to connect and make this network work for farmers and farm workers during this COVID-19 time? And how have you overcome those?
Yeah, so one of the challenges was that there were many producers that were still looking to be able to sell in bulk. And quite frankly, there just were not as many consumers or businesses looking to buy in bulk. It was more on an as needed, smaller family-sized home, or even a smaller institution basis. Ooh, double whammy there. And so for us, it was really important to us to still be able to showcase the producers who still needed bulk buy. And so we made a special way through the site to where you could indicate if you only allowed bulk purchases, if there were ways it could be delivered to you. So we ramped it up a little bit so producers could say specifically how people could buy their products, what quantities really truly look like, and if people were even allowed at their facility at the time, or what the parameters were, especially initially.
Great, great. Well, Lauri, again, I have a little bit of inside knowledge here about some of the research that you're doing, because it is, again, part of what we do here in the PI Center. And you're looking at some of those food chain type questions, looking at local food and food security. Any specific information for this group about some of the things you may have already mentioned in your presentation, but also related to some of this food chain issues that Danielle and FDACS are also trying to assist with during this Farm to You program?
Sure. We did in the third round of data collection, we ask a lot of questions about local food, and some of that's related to a student thesis. So I'm trying not to steal all of her thunder and present all of those things all around. But we were seeing that people were certainly making changes in how they were receiving food. And I think we thought maybe there would be more of an increase in local food consumption than we really saw. But the things that we did see were people were shifting how they were purchasing food. So maybe they were purchasing food online for the first time, which is something we've talked about doing for a long time and wanted people to do, and nobody cared for years. But now we're seeing kind of a shift that people see that is a safe alternative. And so really the AFRI grant that I mentioned that did actually start in September here is looking more at that supply chain disruption and what that means for some of the suppliers. The way Danielle mentioned, matching the right people with the right product is just a little bit harder than it seems like on the surface. So kind of figuring out what those disruptions look like and seeing if we can build an equilibrium displacement model that will be able to forecast what future pandemics and supply chain issues might have, so that we can help people have food that need food and share food and sell food for those people who have too much of it.
Great, thanks. Now, I know also in your presentation talking about science communication there too, Lauri. If you had to kind of bring it down to, I'm not saying boil it down to one or two major points there, but for those who are in either communicators communicating about scientists or scientists who need to communicate about the science, what would be maybe one of those two major points that you would say, these are the key points you really need to focus on related to COVID-19 or in aspects of any aspect of communicating about science?
Absolutely. I think in the data, you could really see people are scared that they're not getting accurate information. So I think a lot of our people who are communicators themselves can fill that gap. Step in, don't be afraid to have conversations. It is a contentious issue, but people want more information. And the more we can share information from credible sources will also be helpful. So it's probably not the time for an organization who's not a health-based organization to create new messages, but rather share the quality information that's coming out from the health departments, from the CDC, from other scientists. So I think those are kind of, from a science communication aspect, the two big things is don't be afraid to share, but share quality.
Great. Well, we have a question from the Q&A portion of our presentation, and with that, I think that we'll be probably wrapping up after this. But I think that the question is such that either one or both of you could take this. I think Danielle will give you the first shot at this. But the question is this: what is the forecast for this upcoming season in terms of any impacts on ag production related to the supply chain? And how will that affect potentially the state's farm workers and economy?
Yeah, so we are still, of course, we plan that there will still continue to be impacts. When we saw initially just towards the latter part of Florida's main growing season, we saw an impact just on that portion alone. So now we're getting ready to experience, the pandemic as a part of a full growing season. So we still expect pretty severe impacts and things of that sort. We still see, many schools where a lot of students are still distance learning. And so the reduction from school districts and school purchasers has gone down. Many businesses like restaurants are still operating at about half capacity and still on limited menus. So there's still a great impact to come. At the department, we stay constantly connected with our affiliated associations and direct support organizations about the messaging and support that are needed there. But also we're looking to ramp up, we're actually working hard on ramping up the Farm to You site to make it to where these things can kind of come directly to your home, similar to delivery site services for grocery stores and, you know, other things of that sort for that restaurants have. We want to make this as seamless as possible. And we're hoping that that experience and opportunity will at least help provide some alleviation for growers and producers, since the convenience aspect of it.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. We're, I'm afraid, out of time for this morning's session. I want to thank you both, Lauri and Danielle, for your comments and for your answers to questions. And for our viewers, I just want you to know that if you'd like to follow up with any of our speakers from this morning, please refer to the State of the Sciences event program that's on our website. You'll find speakers' contact information there to follow up. Now, we will take a short break, and we will be back around 12:20 for session 6. Thank you very much.